Welcome to the first video in our series, Pathogen Murder Mystery, Who Done It? This one is called A Crisis Develops, and I'm going to be giving you some background information on the mystery pathogen that we are going to analyze over the course of this series of videos, and crisis is about to develop. So first, a disclaimer, while some are worried about inferences to particular villains, I don't care about that at all. The people, the pathogens, the places, they're all true. This actually happened. And if any living or dead pathogen wants to sue me for pointing out that they're the culprit, let them go ahead. I don't care. So this is where our story develops. It began in May of 2011. In Hamburg, Germany. A 16-year-old girl came to the emergency room with bloody diarrhea and abdominal pain. And while this was of great concern to her and her family, and probably to the doctors caring for her, we had no real indication that anything bad was on the horizon. Until later that day, in comes her 12-year-old brother. And he has something different. He has acute renal failure. In fact, he's diagnosed with hemolytic uremic syndrome, also known as HUS. Now, this is a pretty serious disease. It starts causing clots in small vessels, especially the kidneys. And it is the leading cause of acute renal failure in children in many countries, including the United States and many of the countries across Europe. Moreover, it is an indication of infection with Escherichia coli, which is a bacterium more commonly known as E. coli. And so this was something new. The girl had bloody diarrhea. Lots of things can cause that. But HUS is generally only caused by E. coli. So they sent off samples for testing because now they're alarmed, right? We have two people in the same family with this, and that boy is really pretty sick. So the next morning, the lab tests come back, and yes, it is confirmed that it's E. coli. Moreover, they did an ELISA, and they saw that there was Shiga toxin present. And why do we care about Shiga toxin? Well, Shiga toxin is something that's on the surface of the bacterium, and it binds to a receptor on the human cell and gains entrance into the human cell that way. One molecule of Shiga toxin can be fatal to a human cell. So this isn't something anybody wants to have. And moreover, Shiga toxins are generally associated with E. coli and some of their close relatives, also known as Shigella. So they know they have Shiga toxin now, which isn't good. Then they do PCR, and they're looking for two particular Shiga toxin genes that are known to be bad when one gets them. And they found that they had the second one, which is called STX2 gene. So then they ran some other tests. They wanted to see, is this like everything else we've been seeing lately? Serum had been collected from people who had had E. coli infections over the, let's say the last 10 years in Germany. And one of the tests they do is you take the bacterium, you put it in some of this sera, and generally, if it's the same, the antibodies will start glomming onto that bacteria, and you'll see this big clump of stuff. That didn't happen here. The cultures were clean. You couldn't see anything in them, which indicates we have something new here that's troubling. Now things are going even worse because Dad comes in, and Dad has HUS too. And not only that, a teenage friend comes in. He had last seen the family 5 days ago, and he's positive, and he has diarrhea. So now we are starting to get concerned, mainly because 5 days ago, a lot can happen in 5 days. And if this is a serious problem, it's got a 5-day head start on us. So we're starting to be alarmed. Later that week, the cases just start escalating across Germany. And we're also seeing cases in France. Within that first month, there were 3,000 cases across Europe. And after the course of the epidemic, 4,000 people would be diagnosed with it. A lot of them with this HUS, which was causing a lot of kidney disease and renal failure. So now we know there's a public health emergency and they start genome sequencing the isolates. You may be asking yourself, wait a minute, why are you doing genome sequencing? We already know who it is. The lab tests showed it was E. coli. Why go any further? Why waste any time, any expense, anything else doing this? We know who it is. Why do the sequencing? Well, I would counter that sequence provides you with rapid and accurate molecular tests to examine this thing. And what we're looking for here when we do the sequencing or anything that's dealing with the genome is you want to get a good fingerprint of whatever this pathogen is. And remember, this is a murder mystery. Fingerprints are very important. And probably the best fingerprint we can get is from genome sequencing. So people have looked at different ways to examine a disease and diagnose what's going on and finding the source. When you just generally, you know it's E. coli, like you see in the first panel, and you can say, well, here are the people that all test positive for it, but you can't really see any patterns of disease within that. When pulse field gel electrophoresis was developed, which I know some labs still do, that was sort of a window into a genomic sequence. You were able to get a kind of rough fingerprint of the disease, and that was really helpful because you could start to see patterns in the disease. But once you're looking at the whole genome sequence, the pulse field is very small. The whole genome sequence is really big. So you can start to discern patterns within those sequences, and it can help you identify not only the source, but if there are multiple sources. Why do I recommend pathogen genomics? Well, not only me, but obviously these authors, of course, is it gives you high resolution subtyping of the pathogens. Genome sequencing gives you, if it's a bacterium, 3 to 6 million base pairs in a particular bacterial genome sequence. And imagine the kind of fingerprints you can get from that, looking for patterns in that data, compared to, like for pulse field gel electrophoresis, 10 to maybe 20 bands on a gel, and those bands only reflect small areas within the genome sequence. So you're either looking at the whole thing or you're looking at these very narrow little pieces of it. Moreover, sequencing is proving to be really powerful in doing things like identifying the serotypes, identifying antimicrobial resistance, and not only looking for presence and absence of virulence factors like Shiga toxin. We could get that with PCR, but you could look for changes in the sequence, which might be a harbinger of something more serious that's developing. Also, sequencing is now generally less expensive, it's easier to do, and it's faster than traditional laboratory approaches. If you start with it, you're there a lot quicker. So where are we in this developing crisis? We first had one infection and then a few infections, and this was the medical community looking at it and understanding that things were not good. Then it started to expand. And when it started to expand, public health was called in to help. Now we've got genomic sequencing, and so we're going to be forced to do genomics. And we need to do this so that we can find the source of the disease and see if there's anything we can do to treat it or to stop it in its tracks. But once we have those genomic sequences, now what? Do we have to hire a specialist like a bioinformatician to help us analyze this data? Over the course of this series, I hope to show you that there are free resources out there where anyone can analyze this type of data and come to conclusions. So I hope that you'll bear with me and follow through on this. Now, the next episode is, well, okay, that one is going to be pretty boring, but it's so necessary because you need to see if your sequences are good or not before you continue with the analysis. So it's really my least favorite thing to do, but I do have to do it. And so please join me. I'll try to make it as painless and quick as possible so that you can understand how to look at those reads and determine if they're any good or not. So thanks a lot and goodbye.